I should have known something was off. When he asked me to rub his shoulders for a little longer that day, I didn't think twice. It was one of those slow, rainy afternoons, when the air feels heavier than usual and silence seems louder than it should. You know the kind. The house was still, like it was holding its breath, and I was tired. Tired in a way that sleep can't fix. We were just sitting there, Netflix murmuring in the background. The kind of peace that only exists when nobody's really talking, but somehow, the silence still feels warm. He said, "Auntie, my back's been killing me lately from all that studying. Can you just do that thing you do again?" And I smiled. Because why not? I'd done it 100 times before. He's my nephew. My sister's boy. And lately, he's been staying with us while finishing his degree. It felt normal. Safe. Familiar. But now, when I look back at it, something in his voice that day, it wasn't just about sore shoulders. You ever look back at a moment and realize it wasn't as innocent as you wanted it to be? That maybe, just maybe, you felt something you shouldn't have? Yeah, that was me. Right then. I remember placing my hands on his shoulders. He let out a breath I wasn't expecting, low, deep, like he'd been holding something in. And then, he leaned back just slightly into my touch. Not too much. Not enough for me to pull away. But enough to make me freeze for half a second. Just long enough to ask myself, am I imagining this? The light from the window hit his face just right. And, in that soft glow, he didn't look like a kid anymore. He looked like a man. That scared me. Because suddenly, I wasn't sure if I was the only one feeling that shift. I told myself I was being dramatic. That I was just tired, maybe even a little emotionally needy. It's been a long time since someone made me feel noticed. You get used to being invisible, you know? Especially when your husband's more interested in his emails than your existence. But still, there was a pull. A tension I couldn't explain. A part of me wanted to pull away. Another part of me wanted to stay, just a second longer. And when I finally looked down at him, he turned his head, looked me straight in the eye. And what I saw, it wasn't confusion. It wasn't even surprise. It was knowing. He looked at me with those eyes familiar, and yet somehow foreign. And then, he asked me something. A question I'll never forget. A question that changed everything. What he said next. I still can't repeat it without shaking. If stories like this make you think twice about how complicated family relationships can get, subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga right now. This story, it's not what you think. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happened next. It started long before that massage. If I'm being honest with myself, it started the day he moved in. My sister had called me in a panic. Her son had just been accepted into a college nearby, and the dorms were full. Could he stay with us for a while? Just until something opened up? Of course, I said yes. No hesitation. I was happy to help. I've always been the one people turn to. The helper. The dependable one. The one who keeps everything together, even when I'm falling apart inside. My husband didn't care either way. He barely looked up from his laptop when I told him. Just mumbled something about making sure the kid didn't mess up the guest bathroom. That's been our marriage for a while now. Empty. Cold. Like we're two ghosts living under the same roof. We sleep in the same bed, but it might as well be two separate worlds. He comes home late, buried in work emails, barely speaks, and when he does, it's only to point out what I've forgotten or messed up. I stopped trying to reach for him a long time ago. It's strange how silence can be louder than shouting. You learn to live with it. You learn to disappear inside yourself. I think that's what made me so open to having my nephew around. Suddenly, the house felt a little less hollow. He brought this quiet energy with him, polite, respectful, easy to be around. He thanked me for dinner. He asked me how my day was. Just little things. But when you've been invisible for so long, even the smallest glances feel like sunlight on your skin. He was 19. That sweet, awkward age between boy and man. He was still figuring himself out, but there was a confidence in him that wasn't there when I last saw him. He'd grown taller, broader. His voice had settled. He carried himself differently. And I noticed. God help me, I noticed. At first, it was innocent. I liked having someone in the house who smiled when I walked into a room. Someone who didn't sigh or look annoyed when I asked how his classes were going. We had little rituals. Tea in the evenings, him telling me about his professors, me complaining about my grocery runs. He laughed at my jokes. I laughed at his. He started calling me his cool aunt. Said I was way younger than he expected me to be. Told me I didn't look old enough to be married. I laughed it off, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't make me feel something. There were moments, tiny flickers, where I caught something in his eyes. Not lust, not yet, but curiosity. A question, maybe. Something unspoken. He'd sit a little too close on the couch. Lean over just a bit when he showed me something on his phone. Brush my hand and say, oops, with a crooked smile. I told myself it was nothing. That I was imagining it. But deep down, I think I knew. Sometimes I caught him watching me. Not in a weird or creepy way. More like he was studying me. Trying to figure something out. Like he was waiting to see if I noticed him noticing me. And the truth is, I did. I noticed everything. I noticed how he'd linger in the kitchen when I bent over to get something from the bottom cabinet. How his compliments started sounding less like nephew to aunt and more like man to woman. How he started talking to me about things he didn't even tell his mom, his ex-girlfriend, his anxiety about school, his dreams of becoming something bigger. And I listened. I gave him my time. My attention, my warmth. Because nobody else asked me about my day. Nobody else cared what I thought or how I felt. My husband hadn't touched me in almost a year, except maybe by accident. We hadn't kissed properly in even longer. So when my nephew came into that empty space with his kind words and open heart, it was like someone turned the lights back on in a house that had been dark for years. I wasn't thinking about anything wrong. I wasn't trying to feel anything inappropriate. I was just breathing again, being seen again. But looking back, I wonder if he saw something in me that even I couldn't see. Something broken. Something starving. I remember one night he told me, "You don't act like anyone else's aunt. You're cool, you're different. I can talk to you." It was a compliment. But it also felt like something more. The way he looked at me when he said it, his eyes didn't blink. He held my gaze, like he was trying to say something else underneath the words. And I felt it again. That flicker. That charge. That quiet, dangerous energy between two people who should never be in the same sentence like this. But I didn't stop him. I didn't stop myself either. Because for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like just a wife or a host or someone people walk past on their way to more important things. I felt wanted. I felt alive. And that's where everything started to unravel. It was a Tuesday. One of those long, dragging days where everything just felt heavier than usual. I had a headache that wouldn't go away. A dull, pulsing kind. The kind that starts behind your eyes and stretches across your whole skull until even blinking feels like a chore. I didn't even bother cooking that night. Just reheated some leftovers and pushed them around on my plate while my husband typed away at his laptop in the other room, not saying a word. I don't think he even noticed I hadn't touched my food. When I stood up to clear the plates, my nephew came into the kitchen. He must have seen the way I was rubbing my temples, trying to ease the pain. "You okay, Auntie?" he asked, soft and casual, but there was concern in his voice. The real kind. I just smiled and said, "Headache. Long day." He walked over behind me and placed his hands gently on my shoulders. "Here," he said, "let me try something." I should have said no. I should have waved him off and told him to go study. But instead, I stood there, frozen for a second, letting him knead into my shoulders, slow and firm. And I'll admit, it felt good. It felt better than it should have. Better than anything had in a long time. I laughed nervously and said, "Shouldn't I be the one doing this for you?" He paused, then smiled. "Maybe later," he said. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just let the moment pass. Later that evening, I found him on the couch, half asleep with his laptop open on his lap. He looked exhausted, worn down by the day, by school, by life. And for some reason, I remembered that little exchange from earlier. "Hey," I said, standing behind the couch. "You still sore from studying all day?" He looked up, eyes a little glassy. Nodded. "Yeah, I guess so." I moved around and sat beside him. "Turn around," I said, almost playfully. "You're cool," and owes you a massage." He smirked, clearly not expecting me to follow through on that earlier joke. But he turned, and I placed my hands on his back. It started simple, just working the muscles near his neck, then slowly moving down to his upper shoulders. He groaned softly, letting his head fall forward. I could feel the tension melting from his body with every touch. And then he sighed. A deep, almost intimate sigh. The kind that sounds more like a release than a breath. I froze for just a moment. My hands lingered where they were. And then he spoke. "Auntie, can you keep going a little lower?" The words hung in the air. Just 5 little words. But everything changed. I didn't say anything right away. My hands hovered, unsure. And in that silence, I swear I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. He said it softly. No pressure. No force. But there was something in the way he said it. Something intentional. Like he was testing me. Like he knew exactly what he was asking and how close we were to crossing a line. My breath caught in my throat. My body tensed. I should have said no. I should have made a joke, changed the subject, pulled my hands away and reminded him who I was. But I didn't. Instead, I whispered, "Okay." And I let my hands move a little lower. Not much. Just below his shoulder blades. Still his back. Still technically innocent. But it wasn't about where my hands were. It was about what it meant. He leaned back slightly. Just enough for his shoulder to brush against my chest. And I didn't move. I told myself it was just a back rub. Nothing more. That he was tired. That I was being kind. That it didn't mean anything. But deep down, I knew that was a lie. Because something had shifted. The way his body responded. The way mine did too. The way the air between us thickened, like the room itself was holding its breath. We didn't say anything else. I finished the massage. Slowly, carefully, every touch calculated, controlled. But underneath the surface, 1,000 things were happening all at once. Desire, confusion, curiosity, guilt. And when I finally stood up and said goodnight, he looked at me. Not like a boy looking at his aunt, but like a man who had just been touched by a woman. And in that moment, I wasn't sure who I was anymore. I wasn't sure what we were becoming. All I knew was, something had started. And I didn't know how to stop it. I couldn't sleep that night. I laid in bed, staring at the ceiling in the dark, listening to the soft hum of the fan spinning above me, and the sound of my own heart, thudding louder than it had in years. It wasn't fear that kept me awake. It wasn't shock either. It was something deeper. Something more dangerous. It was the feeling that I'd just crossed an invisible line, and I didn't hate it. I kept replaying it in my head. The way he'd leaned into my touch. The sound of his breath when I moved my hands lower. That little pause before he spoke, like he was waiting to see if I'd follow him into that unspoken space. And then, the way he looked at me afterward. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't even embarrassed. It was knowing, like we'd both silently agreed not to say it out loud, but we knew something had happened. Something had changed. I closed my eyes and tried to shake the thought. But it clung to me. My chest felt tight. Not in a painful way, in a way that made me feel alive again. It scared me how much I felt. How fast my heart had beat. How warm my skin had gotten. How aware I'd suddenly become of my own body again. When was the last time I felt that? I looked over at my husband lying next to me. His back turned, like always. The blankets bunched up around him, his face lit faintly by the glow of his phone screen. Scrolling through emails or sports highlights, I don't know. He didn't say goodnight. He hadn't touched me in weeks. Months, really. I watched him for a few seconds, wondering if he even noticed me anymore. If he'd notice if I wasn't here tomorrow. If I disappeared completely. That's how I'd been feeling for years. Like a ghost in my own life. Doing the laundry, cooking meals, answering small talk with a smile that felt more like a reflex than anything real. Smiling through the silence. Smiling through the loneliness. smiling through the ache of being completely unseen. And then, suddenly, someone saw me. Not just saw me, felt me. Looked at me like I mattered. Like I was something worth leaning into. Worth touching. Worth asking more from. God, what a dangerous feeling. I felt guilty. I did. But it wasn't the kind of guilt that burns hot. It was the quiet kind. The kind that sneaks in like fog, soft, slow, barely noticeable until it's wrapped around everything. It sat in my chest, but it didn't stop the ache of wanting more. It should have stopped there. I know that. I should have drawn the line. I should have said something, anything. Created distance before it got too hard to step back. But that moment? That simple moment on the couch with my hands on his back? It cracked something open in both of us. Something neither of us knew how to close again. And maybe that's what scared me most of all. Not what had happened, but what it had awakened in me. That hunger I'd buried. That piece of myself I'd convinced didn't need to feel anymore. That desperate, aching need to be wanted. I lay there in the dark, with my husband breathing beside me like I wasn't even there, and all I could think about was how my nephew had sighed under my hands. How he'd asked for more. How he looked at me when I said yes. I shouldn't have liked it. But I did. And no matter how hard I tried to push that truth away, it kept circling back, like a whisper in the back of my mind. What if he felt it too? What if I wasn't alone in this? And if I wasn't? What happens next? It didn't stop. That's the truth I kept pretending not to see. It didn't stop after that first night. The next day, nothing was said. No awkward glances. No questions. He was just himself. Sweet. Polite. Casual. But something unspoken hung between us, like a secret we were both holding in the palms of our hands, afraid to squeeze too tightly in case it shattered. And maybe that silence, that mutual pretending, made it easier to let things happen again. Because they did. The massages didn't stop. They became routine. I'd tell myself it was innocent, helpful, a nice gesture between family. I told myself I was just being kind. That I was offering care, not seeking attention. But the way his body responded told a different story. So did mine. He started requesting them, little by little. Never outright. Just casual suggestions. My shoulders are sore again, my neck's all tight from that stupid online class. Can you work your magic again? And I always said yes. Even when I told myself I shouldn't. Even when I felt the guilt tugging at the edge of my chest. Each time, my hands wandered just a little lower. Stayed a little longer. Pressed a little softer. And each time, he would lean in. Let his head rest forward. Let his arms go limp. Let me take over. And we still didn't talk about it. But the way he looked at me started to shift. There was a slowness to his gaze now, like he was searching for something behind my eyes. Like he was testing how far I'd go, how much I'd let him get away with. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't rude. It was quiet. Calculated. And I felt myself responding to it. I started wearing looser tops in the evenings, putting on perfume I hadn't touched in years. Fixing my hair, even if we weren't going anywhere. Little things, small things. Nothing anyone else would have noticed. But I knew. And so did he. Sometimes when I brushed past him in the kitchen, he'd place a hand gently on my back. Or he'd stand just a little too close when we were both at the sink. One time, I was bending down to get a bowl from the lower cabinet and he didn't move. Just stood behind me. Quiet. Watching. He started cracking jokes that carried a second meaning. You should start charging for those massages. They're dangerously addictive. Or, if you weren't my aunt, I'd think you were trying to seduce me with your cooking. He'd laugh afterward. Play it off. Smile like it was all in fun. But the way he looked at me when he said those things, it wasn't a joke. Not really. And I didn't stop him. One morning, I was in the bedroom, half-dressed, searching for a pair of jeans. The door had been left halfway open. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't expect anyone. But then, I felt it, that eerie sense of being watched. I turned, and he was standing there. Not frozen. Not panicked. Just standing. His eyes lowered, quickly but deliberately, then met mine again. And he didn't say sorry. He didn't say anything. We just stood there, caught in something neither of us wanted to name. Eventually, I turned away, pulled my shirt on, and he walked off. Calm. Cool. Like it hadn't happened. But it had. And we both knew it. After that, the energy between us changed. Became heavier. Charged. And still, we never talked about it. But the silences grew longer. The stares more intense. The brushes of skin more frequent. My hands would linger when I handed him something. His would rest a second longer on my back. It was like every moment between us had a double meaning. A layer no one else could see. And maybe that was the part that pulled me in the most. Because no one else saw me. But he did. He saw me. He felt me. And I was losing the will to pretend it didn't matter. Then one night, during another massage, same couch, same silence. I felt the shift again. He tilted his head slightly, glanced back at me with this slow, deliberate look, and said, "Auntie." He paused, like he was trying to decide whether to finish the sentence. My hand stilled on his back, my heart thudding against my ribs. Then he said something I couldn't pretend to mishear. And that's when everything changed. That night felt different from the start. He was quieter than usual. Focused, but distracted. Like his mind was somewhere else. Like he was waiting for something to happen, but didn't want to be the first to say it. I felt it too. The air was heavier. The silence between us wasn't comfortable anymore. It was tense. Charged. Like a thread pulled too tight. He was lying on his stomach, shirt off this time. Said it was hot, that he'd been sweating from a long day walking around campus. I nodded like it made sense, but I knew better. We both did. I sat behind him on the couch. Placed my hands on his back like I'd done so many times before. I started slow. Gentle circles across his shoulder blades. Down the curve of his spine. He let out a soft breath, steady, but not relaxed. It felt like he was holding something in. So was I. My hands trembled slightly, but I kept going. Focused on the rhythm, on not overthinking it, on pretending this was still normal. But it wasn't. Not anymore. He shifted under my hands. Rolled his shoulders, then turned, slowly, onto his back. I didn't stop him. He looked up at me, eyes soft but direct. There was no fear in them. No confusion. Just clarity. Like he had made peace with something I was still trying to outrun. And then, without a word, he reached up and gently took my hand. He didn't grab it. Didn't pull. Just guided it slowly and placed it on his chest. Right over his heart. It was racing. I could feel it thudding beneath my palm, hard and fast like mine. He held my gaze as I sat there frozen. My hand resting on him, both of us locked in that quiet, terrifying moment. And then he whispered, "Why does this feel right, even though we know it's wrong?" I couldn't breathe. I wanted to say something. Anything. Push his hand away, pull mine back, laugh, scold, get up and walk out of the room like I should have done a long time ago. But I didn't. Because in that moment, his question wasn't just his. It was mine too. Why did it feel right? Why did this feel more intimate than any touch I'd shared with my husband in the last 5 years? Why did this boy, this young man, make me feel more alive in one breath than I'd felt in a decade? I stared down at him, my hands still on his chest, his eyes searching mine. And then, I leaned in. It wasn't planned. It wasn't deliberate. It was instinct. My body moved before my mind could stop it. I leaned down, just slightly. Close enough to feel his breath. Close enough to see the flutter in his lashes. Close enough that the space between us disappeared into something electric. But at the very last second, just inches away, I stopped. I pulled back. Not much, but just enough to let the moment hang. His lips parted, waiting. But I didn't move closer. And neither did he. We just stared at each other in silence. A silence so heavy it pressed against my chest. Because we both knew. We'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Even without the kiss. Even without the words. It was done. The shift had happened. And everything after this moment would be different. Inside me, it was chaos. Lust, sharp and undeniable, pulsing through my veins. Fear, cold and immediate. What were we doing? Validation, God, the validation of being seen, being wanted, being desired again. And shame. A thick, heavy shame that wrapped around me like a second skin. He didn't say another word. Just laid there, eyes open, staring at me like he was waiting for me to decide what came next. I stood up slowly. My hand slid off his chest. And I walked out of the room. Not because I didn't want him, but because I knew. I already had him. And somehow, that scared me more than anything else. The next morning, everything felt wrong. Not in a dramatic, obvious way. Nothing was said. Nothing was done. But the air had changed. And I felt it the moment I stepped into the kitchen. He was already there. Sitting at the table, scrolling through his phone, a bowl of cereal in front of him. I walked in, pretending like nothing had happened. Smiling like I always did. Asking if he slept okay. He didn't look up. Just nodded. A short, clipped, one-syllable answer. Nothing more. I stood there, hand on the kettle, not sure what to do next. My chest felt tight. My skin hot. I couldn't tell if it was guilt, embarrassment, or something else. I made tea I didn't even want. Set the mug down in front of me like it was some kind of anchor, something to hold on to so I wouldn't completely unravel. He got up before finishing his breakfast. Said he had somewhere to be. Somewhere he hadn't mentioned the night before. And just like that, he was out the door. Didn't even look at me. I sat there in the silence, hearing the door click shut behind him, and I wanted to scream. But I didn't. Instead, I cleaned up his half-eaten cereal. Rinsed the bowl. Scrubbed the counter like I was trying to erase something that had already soaked into the foundation. When my husband walked into the kitchen 15 minutes later, I smiled again. Poured him coffee. Asked about his day. He didn't notice anything was different. Not with me. Not with the house. Not with the air. He didn't even glance in my direction for longer than a second. And that somehow made it worse. Because part of me hoped he would notice. That maybe he'd sense the shift. That maybe he'd finally ask me if I was okay. But he didn't. So I carried the weight of that night alone. And for the rest of the day, my thoughts spiraled. Did I imagine the connection? Was it one-sided? Did I just ruin everything over a moment that only I felt? I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd broken something. Not just the line between right and wrong, but something between me and him. That fragile, unspoken trust we'd built through all those little glances and gestures and silences. And now it was gone. Later that evening, I heard laughter outside the window. I peeked through the blinds and saw him in the front yard. With friends. I didn't recognize the girl. She was young. Pretty. Long dark hair, and this effortless way she laughed when he nudged her playfully. I watched him smile at her the way he used to smile at me. That soft, teasing grin. The one that lingered. The one that felt personal. He handed her his phone. She leaned in close, their shoulders touching. He didn't pull away. And I felt something cold settle deep in my stomach. Not jealousy. Not exactly. It was something else. Something quieter. Like grief. I wasn't supposed to feel anything. I was the adult. The aunt. The one who should have known better. But watching him with her made me feel like I'd lost something I never really had in the first place. And suddenly, all those moments we shared started to feel fragile. Like glass. Like maybe they were only real to me. Maybe he'd moved on already. Maybe I was just a chapter in a story he didn't plan to revisit. I wanted to ask him. I wanted to pull him aside, look him in the eyes, and say, "What are we doing?" But every time I saw him after that, he kept his distance. He wouldn't stay in the same room with me for long. If I walked in, he found a reason to leave. If our eyes met, he looked away too quickly. And the silence that followed wasn't heavy with tension anymore. It was empty. It was absence. And that's when it really hit me. Whatever that moment was, it was over. And I was the only one still standing in the wreckage. I've never felt so hollow in my life. And I've known emptiness. I've lived inside it. I've cooked dinner with it. Slept beside it. Folded laundry and smiled through it. But this was different. This was something deeper. This was watching something you let yourself believe in slip through your fingers before you ever even had a chance to hold it. I blame myself. Completely. Not just for what happened, but for allowing myself to want what happened. For letting one moment of attention rewrite the truth I'd been clinging to for years. Because that's what it was, wasn't it? A moment. A single, fragile moment that I'd built a whole fantasy around. And now that it's gone, I feel like I'm left standing in a house made of glass, every wall cracked, every step dangerous. And yet, somehow, I'm still trying to live inside it. How do you explain that to someone? How do you say, I didn't mean to want him? I didn't mean to look forward to the sound of his laughter or the way his eyes lingered on me for just a little too long. I didn't mean to feel something I hadn't felt in years. How do you admit that being seen, really seen, after so long in the shadows, is enough to make you forget who you're supposed to be? I wasn't just his aunt. I became his emotional mirror. He showed me what it felt like to be wanted, to be visible, to be real again. And now, I'm shattered. Because I look at him now, laughing with that girl in the front yard, his eyes lit up, his whole body open and relaxed, and I know. He's fine. He's moving on. That moment meant something, but it didn't break him. It didn't change the course of his life. It didn't bury itself in his skin the way it did mine. He'll forget it. He'll tuck it away somewhere, maybe not even consciously. Just another strange chapter in a messy, complicated coming-of-age story. But me? I'm stuck. Stuck with the memory. Stuck with the ache. Stuck with the question I can't answer. Was it really wrong, if it felt so real in the moment? Because it did feel real. More real than anything I've had in years. More real than my marriage, than the forced smiles at dinner, than the endless days of being invisible. That one night, that one look, that one question, it pulled something out of me I thought was gone forever. And yet, I know how it sounds. I know how it looks. I know the rules that were broken and the roles that were blurred. But tell me this, if your heart beats again after years of silence, if someone touches your soul in a way that jolts you back to life, is it wrong to let yourself feel it? I don't have an answer. I just know that I did. And now I have to live with it. Have you ever been in a situation where emotional loneliness led you somewhere unexpected? Where it wasn't about lust or impulse or some reckless craving for drama, but something quieter, more human. Something you didn't see coming, but once it touched you, you couldn't unfeel it? Have you ever found yourself caught in a moment that felt so real, so vivid, that it made you question everything you thought you knew about yourself? Because that's where I ended up. And I'm still trying to figure out what that says about me. I know what I did was controversial. I know the way people will hear this story, the labels they'll throw at it, the lines I crossed. But I need to know honestly, was I the only one who's ever felt this way? Was I the only one who reached for connection in the dark and found it in the wrong place? If you've ever been there, if you've ever stood at the edge of something forbidden just because it felt safe for a moment, tell me. Please. Because silence can be a heavy thing to carry alone. And if you're still here, still listening, still feeling all of this with me, subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga. This is where we tell the stories no one else dares to say out loud. The ones buried in guilt, in shame, in those hidden corners of the heart where truth and temptation collide. Leave a like if you've ever been torn between loneliness and what's right. Leave a comment if you've ever felt like your heart woke up in a place it never should have been. I'll be here, reading, listening, trying to make sense of it all, just like you. Because sometimes the lines between right and wrong aren't drawn in black and white. Sometimes they're sketched in soft, shifting shades of gray. The kind you only see when no one's looking. The kind that hide inside the cracks of being unseen. He never brought it up again. And neither did I. But that one moment? That one flicker of something that shouldn't have existed? It still echoes every time I close my eyes. It doesn't scream. It whispers. And it never really leaves. And just when I thought the past was behind me, someone else in the family came forward with their secret. You won't believe what happened next.